So, welcome everybody. This is one of our amazing sessions in our Awake, Aware, Arise virtual conference at Coach Aria, where we're going to be challenging your thinking as coaches and leaders on what leadership and coaching could be and the impact that this can make in our world. And these are really challenging times. So we're bringing everyone together and have amazing speakers like David Clutterbuck with us to share their insights and their wisdom. And I'm Leah, I'm the youth program lead for Coach Aria, and I will be hosting this session. I will disappear in a minute, but I will be watching the chat box. Do select the chat box to all panelists and attendees and introduce yourself. Where are you from? Why are you here? And any questions that you have, I will keep an eye out on them and ask David if he hasn't seen them. What else? David Clutterbuck to introduce you. So today's session is on coaching for a more ethical world, something actually really close to my heart. We need more ethical leaders. We need a more ethical world, and I cannot wait to hear what you have to say. David is the co-founder of EMCC, the European Mentoring Coaching Council. I hope I've got this right, now global. So we're covering the whole world now, not just Europe. And David has also written over 70 books, or co-authored on 70 books. And I've had the pleasure of having to study some of them for my master's. So it's quite an honor to be here. So David, it is over to you. Thank you.
Very much, Leah. So bear with me while I bring up the slides. So we have to go into share screen. Do that. Pull up the slides. Go into slide view. And if the technology works, you should be able to see everything. Leah, is that working?
It is for me. Can everybody else see it? Just someone say yes, please, in the chat. Yes, thank you very much.
Brilliant. So under this view, I can't see the chat room here. So so I'm relying on Leah to bring me up. Interrupt at any time, Leah, if you think there's a great question that's that needs to be answered.
Of course.
So this is a subject that's dear to my heart. The whole issue of ethics, and Leah mentioned the word wisdom. The two things that are intricately entwined, and and of course, in terms of mentoring, we go back all the way. The origins of mentoring are in the goddess Athena, the goddess of wisdom, and so there's so much here about being wiser. And if you like, ethics is the ability to use our wisdom to create positive outcomes for ourselves and for other people. If you like, it's to make it ethics. Ethics are what's required in order to make a world that's more sustainable, more livable, and so forth. And so I'm going to go through some of the practicalities and share some frameworks with you and talk about authenticity and its relationship to ethics. And I think the focus we've got today, how do we promote ethical behavior in ourselves and our clients? The big question. How do we and our clients remain ethical and authentic in politicized corporate and society environments? How do we actually encourage ethics in the workplace? It's a big challenge for us, and to a large extent, coaches have sort of ducked out from this one. There's no, I'm here to coach my client. My focus is on my client. Increasingly, we're beginning to question, is that ethical? Look at the situation. You're coaching a client to succeed, but is that person the right person to succeed in that organization? You might be coaching individual people within a team, but does a bunch of people, all of whom are individuals who are performing better, automatically make a higher performing team? Well, the answer is no, it doesn't. It may actually make a worse. In fact, more often than not, a team full of high performers will actually be a lower performing team than one of moderate performers. We have some issues here. Everywhere we look, we have ethical issues, and the ethical codes of practice, while they're very helpful and they stop us doing really stupid things, still don't allow us to address these really big issues of the roles of coaches and mentors too in in promoting an ethical world. So I'm going to try and explore some of the issues here. And forgive me, I can't cover everything here because it's such a big area, but I hope to raise enough thinking in your minds to be able to ask better questions than I'm asking. Because always the key is not to find the better answers, it's to find better questions. What we're seeing now across the world is a lot of problems relating to, for example, short-term thinking. One that there's in this week's or this month's Harvard Business Review, there's an article about how many organizations are rowing back on empowerment. What they're doing, for example, people working from home during the COVID crisis, they're installing software to monitor how much time they're spending on their computer and what they're doing on their computer. Now, how does that fit with an ethical society? Is that, in terms of human dignity, is this unethical? My personal view would be yes, but that's a question. The ethics are not, there's no right answer in ethics. There's a range of different right answers which we choose according to circumstance. Then we've got the politics of fear and polarization. Looking around the world, the United States, India, Turkey, Russia, also China, so many, half of Africa, we see that the people in the leadership positions in those countries are ruling by dividing people, by polarizing them. And if you create conditions of fear, the moderate middle disappears. It's like when you put two people into with strongly opposing views into a debate, they come out of it more strongly entrenched in their previous views because they don't have the skills of dialogue. They only have the skills of preaching and insisting that I'm right. They think they're even righter before than they did. Even if that means in certain circumstances, it's okay to go around injecting yourself with bleach or whatever it is that the latest inanity from President Trump. This issue of authentic leadership vacuum. There is a crisis of confidence in our leaders. People no longer trust their leaders to have their well-being at heart. It goes back to a study over 40 years ago, which was done in Ford motor plants, and looking at the local leadership, the plant leadership. What actually made people feel that the leadership was effective? What empowered people and made them committed to their jobs? And it turned out that there were two factors. Do the leaders know what they're doing? And do they care about me and my colleagues? If those two boxes were ticked, people felt confident and secure and empowered. If they weren't, even if they got a lousy manager immediately above them, but if those boxes weren't ticked, then that's where you had all the industrial problems and unrest. we still have this leadership vacuum, and potentially it's getting worse. Now, I can't evidence that, but look around us. Where do we see great leaders? Leaders who you can look up to and say, I would like to be like them. And if we can't say that, then there's something deeply, deeply wrong. So, as I've already indicated, one of the challenges for coaches is that one-to-one coaching might be part of the problem, not part of the solution. We may be making things worse. And part of the role in creating the Global Team Coaching Institute, which we've done this year, has been to try and redress that, to actually equip more and more coaches with the skills to coach the leader and the team, to get that balance right between coaching individuals and coaching teams. And what about our impact on things like climate change and poverty? There's a wonderful movement now of many, many coaches coming together to try and see how they can influence climate change. Less of a focus on things like poverty. And yet we're in a privileged position. We get to talk with the leaders of large corporations, with political leaders, with military leaders and others, people who do have the ability to bring positive change about. So how are we using those conversations? Are we simply saying, well, I'm here just to improve their performance, or in a very narrow focus, the goals that we set in the relationship, that's what I'm going to work on? Or are we here to have a bigger, more significant impact on the world around us? And I think that's an ethical challenge for every coach, and one which we can make our own minds up about. How, to what extent are we going to rise to that challenge? And this whole thing of codes of practice are wonderful, but they set a baseline. They do not come anywhere near turning somebody into a role model for ethical behavior or a role model for wisdom. And it's that step beyond the codes of practice. Codes of practice are a hygiene factor. They're about the doing of coaching. They are not about the being of coaching. And so here's another big challenge for us as coaches. So let's just get some things in the chat room. What ethical dilemmas have clients brought to you, or you may have met for yourself in your coaching? Just let's see in the chat room, and Leah will pull out some of the things that are most interesting. What have we got, Leah?
I think people are busy typing away. They might have some very long questions happening here, David.
Okay, that's
okay. Yep, we have. Okay, first one from Karen. A coachee being aware of corruption amongst colleagues.
Yeah. What do you do? Yes.
Yep. Okay, Michael, coaching siblings when not being aware of them being related.
Yes.
Brilliant. Next one from Dharmesh, layoffs in crucial times.
Yeah.
Anja, my first coaching assignment at a tobacco company. I don't like smoking.
Very interesting. Let me comment on that one, because that's a brilliant one. This is a debate we had last year. And the debate was around, should the coach work with a tobacco company, helping its employees to achieve greater work-life balance? I'm truncating it. There was a bigger comment, but this is the core of the issue. Now, on the one hand, we do not wish to promote, or most of us would not wish to promote a tobacco company. On the other hand, we have a duty of care towards anyone. Like a doctor, you don't refuse to treat somebody because they're a criminal or whatever. You are there to support people as a human to human. So what is the judgment here? And in the end, the judgment was very individual, of course, as to whether people took part, but it was, what is the objective of this coaching? Is this coaching about increasing the profitability or increasing the reach and sales of the tobacco company? Or is it about the human welfare of people inside the organization? And there was the boundary created. Now, you can argue one way or the other, which is that, and it's a very personal thing, but it's a very clear ethical dilemma that we dealt with. Any more there? Yeah.
We've got one from Dumi. One of my individual executive clients challenged me on coaching reinforcing elitist practices. We also have one from Victoria. Sponsor being upset because coached employee resigned. I imagine that's quite a common one, actually.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's as a defense mechanism that there is an ethical dilemma here, and that is in actually contracting with the sponsor. That this should be part of the contract, that one of the outcomes may be that the client is in the wrong role, and how do they want, if that is the case, do they want that person to leave in a positive manner or in a negative manner? If it's in a positive manner, then that person may be available for re-recruiting later. If you're going to say, right, you've resigned, you're going to be escorted by security out of the building with your contents of your desk in a plastic bag, that's probably not going to create a relationship with that person, and not going to create them into an ambassador for the company later. Any more?
We've Angie's just replied and said it was about the human welfare, but surely the company was interested in the person being able to do their job. So that was in response to the tobacco
Yes,
company.
exactly. Not as simple as it looks, is it?
And we have, and I'm sorry, I'm going to pronounce people's names wrong here. So pre-apologies, but Ben Gopal, paying money to get more business.
Ooh. It's on the context, but yes, very interesting.
And then Karen, sponsor investing and leadership coaching. Coachy telling me early on that he is looking to leave the organization.
So that's an ethical dilemma for the coach. What do you tell? You're bound by confidentiality. And one of the things that we can do is to have a conversation with that client. How are you going to be ethical in the way that you manage this issue? There are two possible ethical answers here. One of them is that as a coach, if this comes up in the contracting, then you have to make a decision. Can you actually go ahead with that relationship? Because it's under, we said to be under false pretenses to the sponsor. If it gets revealed during the course of the coaching, then the confidentiality responsibility towards the client takes precedent. But that's, again, it's an arguable case, but that's how we would typically argue that kind of case.
David, we have quite a few more. Would you like me to go through them?
Let's save the rest of them till later. Otherwise, we could be just dealing with that one.
I agree.
But you can see, I can see that we've touched some really good nerves here. Maybe we need to collect these up and if everybody agreed to distribute them without names, that'd be a good idea. So just look at these statistics. This is a 2018 study of the States. 30% of employees personally observed misconduct in the previous 12 months. And unethical practices were instrumental in more than half of the largest bankruptcies in the previous 30 years. These are just the tip of the iceberg. Other studies have shown that young graduates joining organizations, I forget what the figure was, it was very high, it was something like 70% of them were faced with being asked to do something unethical in their first 2 or 3 years within an organization. There's so much data here. What it tells us is that unethical behavior is rife. I do recall one person I was coaching looking around the big open plan office in the bank that he was working in, and saying, it's fascinating. He says, now that guy over there, he's involved in insider trading or in rate fixing. Yeah. He said, now he's going to jail. And look at him, that guy over there is likely to go to jail too. And that one, a fascinating conversation. I couldn't see any of these people, but wow, what a situation to be in. This is not, unethical behavior is not necessarily the norm, but it is actually a very commonplace thing that we see. And Adam Grant's book, Originals, in one study across manufacturing, service, retail, etc., the more frequently as an employee you voice concerns or indeed voice ideas, suggestions upwards, the less likely you were to get raises and promotions over a 2-year period. So now the other words, keep your head down. If you stick your head up, it's likely to be shot at. This is not good news, is it? So one of the measures we've been playing with in our work on ethics in organizations is ethical risk. So it's the level of openness and psychological safety in a culture. So it involves, if the cultural norm is poisonous, how much is there an expectation? It typically goes along with an expectation that people will go along with it. Fear cultures are typical of this. And so there's an issue here as well in what do people see when they look at the decisions that are made? Do they see this as an organization that's taken decisions that put a high value on ethicality, or that are decisions made for short-term advantage? I don't know what's like in the various countries that that you're all in. But one example of this was one of the big pub chains, which basically was fired most of its staff right at the beginning of the COVID crisis, on the basis they could save more money doing it that way if they had to close it, rather than say, well, okay, we have a loyalty towards these people, and there's a government furlough scheme to support it. But basically, that would have still cost them money, so they got rid of everybody. Or that was the plan, and the reputation of that business is in the gutter, and it wasn't thought through, and yet we see so much of this. This again, short-term thinking, a failure to look at the ethical and moral considerations, the responsibilities towards other people, and so if we define an ethical dilemma, an ethical dilemma is not as straightforward as that. The example I just gave was not an ethical dilemma. It was just sheer, blunt, unethical, immoral behavior. Ethical dilemma is something different. An ethical dilemma happens when somebody doesn't know which of several choices to make. When you've got more values competing for the same priority. And there can be all sorts of values: personal, organizational, society, or any mixture of the three. Let me give you a practical example. Many, many years ago, Barclays in South Africa had the dilemma that it was being urged and pressurized, particularly from the United States and from pressure groups in Europe, to close down its South African operations. And I remember interviewing the chief executive about this whole issue, and he said, "Well, look, we've spent a lot of time and had a lot of sleepless nights trying to work out the ethics behind this." He said, on the one hand, we totally are totally and utterly against apartheid. We think we have no wish in any way to support apartheid, and whatever possible in our employment policies inside the bank, we try and where it's not made illegal there, we will find ways around it to support our employees and treat them as equals. But he said, if we were to accept that it's not possible, that it's not possible to be totally free with the way that we work with our employees, therefore that we should close down, the implications of that are significantly worse. We have, I forget the number of employees, well, let's say 20,000 employees. On average, every one of those employees is the primary breadwinner for a family of 7 or 8 other people. So if we just close down, that means something like 150,000 people will be thrown into poverty. What responsible employer could do that? Now, there were people who would argue against that position. It's quite, you can see that you can make it and say, no, we have to make a stand and so forth. So, but it's a matter of moral perspective. At the least damage, if you our argument versus the strict what's morally right. There is no absolutely pure right answer. But where we've got these conflicting values, the clarity about why we've chosen to go with one set of values versus the other enables us to maintain our own authenticity and also to maintain reputation. And as coaches, we can help organizations to do this, we can do it ourselves, and we can help our clients to do it. So basically, when we see ethical dilemmas arising in organizations, it's basically because you don't actually, ethical dilemmas get buried. Nobody wants to talk about them. No group of surgeons in a hospital, for example, feels comfortable about shopping one of their colleagues who they've worked with for years, who happens now to have a drink problem. And yet there is a moral obligation and a legal obligation for them to do so, but they choose not to notice things. And this is a case, again, of the wrong priorities dominating. The loyalty to colleagues versus patient safety. And it's because they can't step out of it. The net perspective is too narrow. They don't see it in that wonderful way. Is if this were being done out publicly or acted out publicly, would we be doing the same thing? If people could see what was going on, would they act? How would we feel and how would we behave? So ethical dilemmas are created by secrecy and by fear. The kind of thing that we see, the most common things are financial reporting, high pressure work environments, particularly where people are being pushed to hit tough targets, stretch goals. Stretch goals, particularly in a marketing or sales environment, are closely associated with unethical behavior. People will, if they're not going to hit a target when they're going to miss it by a little bit, they will cheat and steal in order to make it happen. Where you've got a lot of competition in a crowded market, where people don't talk about that, you're discouraged from opening up big cultural issues. Where you basically find that customers have been treated unfairly, but they've got nobody to complain to until they actually go to the press or somewhere else, or employees being treated unfairly and not having anybody else to go to. And codes of conduct just aren't good enough. They tend to, they can't cover everything, and then you try and cover everything. They're so complex. There's lots of wriggle room in the cracks. And what you get is people, well, I adhered to the letter. That's what it said. And even if that was something that was palpably that any reasonable person would say, yes, but that's not what was meant. I'm always reminded of the person who was driving the wrong way down a one-way street and was stopped by a policeman. And she says, but I'm only driving one way. And it's a similar piece of tautological logic. And here we go. And people can be confused because ethics aren't fixed. The ethics one of the big problems we have now with the Black Lives Matter movement and the whole pushback against colonialism is that our societies in the West were actually, and indeed in many other countries, were founded on slavery and what we now regard as totally unethical behavior, but which 400 years ago was seen as quite normal. And indeed, if we think back, slavery was only abolished in the last bits of Europe, in Russia, in 1915, or was it 1917, when Russia fell when the Tsar fell and was assassinated. So if we think about ethics as in the terms of what we believe right now, it creates all sorts of complications, because ethics relate to the society in which you're in. The ancient Greeks, we think of fantastic about the word ethics comes from there, and yet the ethical behavior, the ethics of the Greek society, I think, has many elements which we would find appalling now. And so, how does we have to accept that ethics are something that constantly evolves, and the degree to which we can be judgmental about people whose ethics come from a different era, or who lived in a different era, is, I think, we are probably being unethical in applying our ethics today to the ethical environment of people in a different time, in a different situation. And that's a big challenge. Somebody can probably come back to me on that one, I expect. It's often dependent on conflict. There's usually two or more legitimate obligations that people have, as in the Barclays example. And what we tend to do, we rationalize things away. Oh, it doesn't really matter. It's okay. It's okay. Well, a real example, it's okay to steal toilet paper from the office because, no, it's not going to, it won't make any difference in the corporate profits. And yet, of course, it's not good. It's not good. It's not acceptable because it is theft. So we can rationalize things away very easily. And so people justify unethical behavior by saying it's not really illegal or immoral. It's in the company's best interests, as the engineers of Volkswagen no doubt thought while they were falsifying tests. Of course, it wasn't in the company's best interests, because when it catches up with the company, the implications of sales, the cost of implications of this terrible thing that they did was much greater than any savings they might have made. It's never going to be found out, so it's safe to do it. That's a common one that we see. And the company will protect me. Well, maybe. Believe that one if you believe in fairies and the flat earth. But people convince themselves. What we found with ethical coaching and mentoring is that it's a confidential learning relationship between peers. So it helps the mentee or the coachee resolve ethical issues. So I've got an ethical problem. What's the best? How do I need to think this through? It helps them to actually recognize when they've got an ethical issue, because sometimes it's not obvious to them. They're just really worried about something. They feel anxious about it, but they haven't seen it in terms of this is an ethical dilemma. It also helps to change the culture of the organization, to make the whole organization more open and transparent and ethical. And therefore, it enables you to create more authentic, better values-driven leaders who are, again, able to become the role models for ethicality in their organizations. And one of the close associations we observe, but which we've never been able to fully prove, is where you have ethical role models at the top, you will tend to have much more ethical behavior all the way through an organization. But that's a whole area of research. So we can describe it as about ethical coaching. I've changed it. I've got the words coaching and mentoring interchangeably here, simply because we call it both. But it's about helping others to make better decisions at work that will affect the well-being of others. It's a moral context to help people evaluate business processes and for resolving conflict between business and social imperatives. And the key things are, is there an ethical issue present? Can we have a process to evaluate the options? And can we actually check and review the decisions we make to see were they really ethical decisions? And that's all it is. It's very simple at that level. Of course, it's much more complex in actually doing it. So core here, how do you develop ethical behavior in yourself? And how do you develop it in other people? And it sounds simple. It's a big challenge. So when we're helping a client think about bringing an ethical dilemma to coaching, what data can they give you that would help you to understand what's going on here? It's no good. I think we've got a problem here. Where's the data? What do you know and not know about this? Have they done some reflection beforehand? Have they thought about their own values and how those values might be affecting how they see this issue? And when they come for discussion, are they in an appropriate mind frame to make the most of the dialogue you're going to have with them? Now, clearly, if somebody is deeply distressed, that's not going to be easy for them. So our responsibility then as a coach or as a mentor is to help them actually calm down and be able to come into a more rational, more open environment or frame of mind. And you know, it may take time for them to do that, but it's important that they are open to thinking about the issue without being totally panicked by the whole thing, or totally angry about things. So they have to step back from it, if you like, and helping them to do that may take quite a while. But that's often the first thing that we have to do as a coach, is help them step back from it emotionally sufficiently to start thinking about it rationally. If we then want to be clear with our clients what we want from them, what we need from them, we need them to be honest in presenting this issue to us. That isn't easy again, because very often they will have told themselves a story, a narrative about this. And very often in that narrative, they are totally innocent. They haven't done anything to, particularly if it's something wrong done to them. Yeah, it's my boss or my colleague. It's all them, and they are behaving wrongly and unfairly, and and so forth. And just looking at that, how much of this is you are taking responsibility for? And so looking at the responsibilities here, they need to be willing to be challenged about their assumptions, and indeed to challenge themselves. They need to recognize their values, and you can help them with that, but then they need to have the courage to act according to their values. Now, we can't make them do that, but we can create clarity around what being courageous would mean in those situations and the outcomes of being courageous. Of course, confidentiality. What you say to them and they say to you has to be confidential. It has to be confidential. But unless, of course, they're telling you something that is basically illegal, where you have a legal requirement to do something about it. And that happens more often than you might expect. They need to take time to reflect beforehand and afterwards about the conversation you have. And again, we're back to courage, looking at the systemic barriers to ethicality. What's actually happening here? The fear culture being one of those. Nobody dares speak up here, because if you do, you get all the lousy jobs to do, or you're likely to be fired, or whatever. So these are just some of the things that I think are important to agree with the client before you start being an ethical mentor or coach to them. And what we've found is we have a framework here for the ethical dialogue. So we help them to articulate the problem, look at the context, think about the implications, look at other perspectives, balance the arguments, and then do a final check. These 6 elements basically undermine all effective ethical coaching conversations. And we've already talked about some of the fears they may have, but very often they'll come to you, they haven't had time to think it all through. They don't understand the consequences of their own actions and decisions. They may have stormed out of a meeting, for example. They may perceive that the unethical behavior is the norm. It's the culture of the team they work in. Or they really don't want to know. They want to dump the problem on you. That's very common as well. Now, I'm bringing you this ethical dilemma that I've got, so you can be my rescuer. Welcome to the drama triangle. And of course, we can't get stuck into there. Adam Grant's lovely work on whether people speak up is great. Now, I won't go into this in detail, but I recommend it as reading. You've got 4 choices here. You can try and change the situation. You can try and maintain the status quo. You can take action which is detrimental to the organization, or action which is beneficial to the organization. And there's only one of these which actually changes things for the organization in a beneficial way, and that's to have voice. But how do you have voice? Where does voice come from? When you have voice, people listen to you. But who listens to the lone voice in the wilderness? Nobody. And one of the key things that we can do as ethical coaches and mentors is to help the person develop the network of people who can actually speak up as a group rather than just as isolated individuals, and to explore with them, what would it take for you to have voice? And I think the Me Too movement is a wonderful example of how a few strong people came together and started, and together they spoke out. And where it'd been one here and there and nobody taken much notice, when they spoke out together, people started to listen, and then other people came and spoke out too. And the Black Lives Matter protests as well. These have had a similar evolution. So part of our role as a coach is helping people to find the mechanisms by which they can find voice. And that's a really challenging one. So who else is out there who's prepared to do something about this? It just reminded me of a story that I haven't thought of for many years. And this happened in one of the big United Nations organizations. And it was a manager who was a bit too free with his hands, and when a young woman in his new recruit into his department found him behaving in this inappropriate manner, she went and shocked. She talked to some of her colleagues, and they all said, "Oh yes, well that's him. You just ignore it." And she said, "Well, I can't do that." They said, "Well, you won't get anywhere in this organisation. Nobody will listen to you." And she talked to people outside the department, and they said, "No, nobody will listen to you. They're not interested." And so what she did was to she photocopied one evening some posters, and she, I don't know how many, but there were a lot of them. And these posters said, "Watch out, girls! Mr. So and so has gone from doing this to doing that. Watch out for his hands." And then she put these in the lift in each of the elevators in the lifts. She put them on the stairwells. She put them on the back doors from the car park. She put them all over the building. And of course, suddenly it all came out of the woodwork again. People felt empowered to say something. That's what courage she had. What a wonderful example. Not necessarily a role model for doing it all, but certainly a role model for courage. When we make decisions, ethical or particularly ethical decisions, we've got two logics here. The logic of consequence. What course of action will produce the best result? And the logic of appropriateness. What does a person like me do in a situation like this? And the classic thought experiment here, done in thousands of ethics classes, is the one of the runaway railway wagon. You're walking along and you're right by the lever that moves that can take this runaway wagon away from the path it's on, where it's going to kill a whole load of railway workers, and you can shift it to one where it's going to just kill an old man walking his dog. And if you take the logic of consequence, well, you should push the lever because you're going to kill, fewer people are going to die. If you take the logic of appropriateness, you say, yes, but who am I to make that decision about who should live and die? And that classic dilemma is one that, again, there is no right answer to this. We all come to it in different ways. But if we can apply both ways of thinking, then we tend to have a much more balanced ethical decision making. So the first element is articulate the problem. So who's involved in this problem? How are they involved? Why are they affected by it? What's the nature of this conflict of interest? What are the values that are involved here? So pretty much just get the clarity around these kind of issues. And then the context. So let's look at who's indirectly involved with this. And where is there likely to be fallout amongst other people, for example? Is it a recurrent issue or simply another one, an old one? Or is it something new that you've not seen before? And I love this question. What are your specific and general responsibilities? So looking at both of those things, who's being consulted and who needs to be consulted? And have they really been consulted? Or just a quick, like a quick local authority survey whenever all the decisions have been made? Is there a relevant code of conduct, a guideline here? And what's the general ethical climate here? Does that push people to, how does that influence things? And then the implications. So what about the risks involved? And of course, there's safety risks, there's financial risks, but reputational risk too. What about the long-term risks that are involved here? I was at sitting in a board meeting of a large company, multinational company, years ago. And the chairman was saying, look at the results from our Italian subsidiary. Aren't they brilliant? If only all the other countries could be reporting results like that. And then one of the non-executive directors said, yes, but at what cost? And there was a little puzzle went around the table and said, well, let's look at some of the other data here. Out of the top 20, 3 of them have had heart attacks. One has died, one is on long-term leave, and the other one is back on half time. And they came up with a number of other criteria. What's going on here? And when they investigated, what they found was all of these great figures have been at the cost of cutting corners. So in particular in terms of safety. So if the risk of a major failure in which many lives would be lost, with all the catastrophic outcomes of that for the company, made the profit that have been paper profit that have been made there minuscule. And of course they had to do something about that and fire the chief executive of that division. The whole thing was run on fear. So looking at the widespread of risks here, what precedents are we going to set here if we do this? And similar to that, what would be the impact if we did this on a much larger scale? And again, that wonderful question, would the implications be different if we played it out publicly versus privately? If your mother was watching, what would she say? Is, I think, a lovely question. And okay. Then the next question, what other opinions might be relevant? So what are you trying not to, what are you trying not to see here? What are you avoiding acknowledging? Who might provide a robust challenge to your thinking? And have you asked them? When you did ask them, did you actually listen to them? What will make people feel more comfortable about speaking up? Have we actually got a climate here that prevents people speaking up? So we're only getting half the picture. And have we genuinely, honestly sought out and listened to dissenting views? And give it and not just listened to them, but actually considered them from multiple perspectives. And then balancing the arguments. If somebody came as an impartial advisor, would they see our solution as fair? How can we apply appropriate priorities to these conflicting objectives and the conflicting values? This phrase, zones of ethical acceptability. So there's an unacceptable outcome here or process here. There's an unacceptable process here, and in the middle there's a chunk where we can make different decisions, but they will be ethically acceptable. How do we define that? Sitting down, mapping out different courses of action and looking at them in terms of their position on that spectrum from totally ethically unacceptable to totally acceptable. And very often the totally acceptable ones aren't feasible simply because there's not, for example, the resources to do it. Doctors are going to have to make some pretty hard decisions about who gets treatment if the COVID epidemic gets out of control, for example. And then the final check, the financial, what decision-making biases might you be applying without realizing it? How honest are you being with yourself? I love this question, how pure are your motives? Really gets to the heart. Do you honestly really, truly think this is the right thing you should be doing? And if we gave the issue more time, would we come to a different conclusion? Those 4 questions I think are so powerful at the end of any decision that has an ethical dimension to it. And we've trained over 200 ethical mentors in the UK National Health Service, for example. And they're doing a wonderful job helping people. Preventing whistleblowing is one of the things that we get, because if somebody might be a whistleblower, what you do is you're making sure that they have a route to make their voice heard. And so the occurrence of whistleblowing, we believe, has been significantly decreasing, while the amount or the volume of real issues being surfaced and dealt with has been increasing. So I'm going to shift gears slightly here and talk about some research that we're just about to launch, which is about how you stay authentic and ethical in a politicized environment. And this is a survey which is going out very shortly. and we can distribute it to everybody on the webinar if they would like to take part. But the story really of coaching belongs in political leadership. Athene, the goddess of wisdom, the original mentor, Machiavelli, the prince, and Fenelon, the French cleric, who created modern mentoring through his continuing the dialogues of Athena, and was authentic and turned the young Dauphin, the prince, the son of King Louis, the Sun King, into from a brat into a leader with conscience and an ethical understanding. We've seen coaching and mentoring become instruments of social manipulation, and that's great as long as it's for positive ends. And we've also begun to see coaching and mentoring of politicians. That's much more recent. And in fact, one of my favorite examples is of a local authority where you have the councillors elected. You have a mentor when you join the council for the first time, but it's not a mentor from your party, it's a mentor from one of the other parties. So, and I think this is what a wonderful way of this is true, authentic coaching and mentoring. So we can describe politics in many ways, but two I like is the power to influence and the art of expediency. We can't get away from politics. Sometimes we think of politics as a bad thing, but authentic politics, trying to achieve social change through influence, has to be a good thing. It's the way that politics is used and the purpose for which it's used, which is the problem. Politics with a big P, party politics, usually driven by expediency, short-term agendas, been described as a means for the organized few to control the disorganized masses. And some lovely studies of the Russian Revolution or the American Revolution to show how an organized few people with a political agenda could actually seize control of a country. And we see this happening right now across the world as well. It's about creating common narratives that people can latch onto because they're comfortable and convenient. And so they're a contract, if you like, a psychological contract between the controllers and the controlled. And if you read their wonderful book, Homo Deus, that gives you some lovely examples of this. And the trouble with politics is it attracts sociopaths. And the difference, how do you, and it's very difficult to distinguish sometimes between the idealist and the sociopath. The idealist desperately wants to achieve a change for greater good. The sociopath, of course, wants to achieve change for their own good. But distinguish between the two, not as easy as it might look. So entrepreneurs, interestingly, are not, obviously they do apply political approaches, but they tend to be motivated by potential gains, whereas professional politicians are motivated by avoiding damage or loss in the decisions that they make. And this, I think, is a fascinating difference. If we are going to be political, we focus on avoiding damage. If we're going to be politically astute or politically aware and authentic, we focus on potential gains. One of the distinguishing factors, which we think we can demonstrate. So, is it wrong always to take decisions based on short-term gains? How would we have that conversation with a coaching client? When we apply values, the values we apply in the short term are not necessarily the same as those we apply in the longer term. How do we help our clients distinguish between those two things? What's our responsibility in this context? Let's have some of your thoughts around these questions.
They're busy typing away again.
So what have we got there?
Nothing yet. I presume people are thinking quite deeply. Oh, here's one. From Dumi. Is it ethical for coaches to appoint themselves as moral guardians of society?
Hey, oh, wonderful, brilliant. Yes, a great question. And yeah, yes, who's to say that your morals are better than their morals? Absolutely. And my instinctive response to that is to say that our responsibility is to help people be aware of the ethical dimensions of the decisions they make, or the way that the moral outcomes of the decisions they make, but it's not to make those decisions for them or to tell them what decisions they should make. But I'm open to catch a challenge on that, like everything else.
David, that's it for now. We
Wow.
do have some comments from earlier, though. I don't know if you want me to touch on those.
We can deal with a few of those now, yeah.
Okay, so from Manny, we have how to make ethical decisions in the spur of the moment, like the car example you gave, which doesn't allow such deliberation or logical slow thinking. Does intuition help?
I think it does if you can step outside yourself and say, what does a person like me do in a situation like this? So look at you have those two questions, the logic of consequence and the logic of appropriateness. Just apply those two things, those two questions to yourself. And that just begins to pull out some of the two contrasts.
Nice.
Oh, there is one other question which I find a great question. Whichever way I decide, will I respect myself for having decided so?
I was writing that down very quickly to remember myself. It's a great question. And we have a question earlier from Natarajan. As a coach, if I feel something is unethical, but my client doesn't believe it that way, how do I deal with it?
Well, it's the client's responsibility, ultimately. We can say, well, I have some difficulty personally with that, but it's not my decision. It's your decision. But I'm interested in how you came to that decision yourself, and can you explain to me or help me to understand how you came to feel that was okay? And so what were the values you were applying in this circumstance? And so we can't. They may well be in their context right. We may just not understand their context enough. But we have to make but our responsibility to help them think it through a bit more deeply than they might instinctively do.
And David, we have one more, which is a comment, I guess could be a question in a way. Is a short-term decision to be in the overall long-term and a nobler ethical aim?
I don't quite understand that.
Prakash, could you explain that a little bit more, or reword it, if possible?
Can we unmute him? Or?
I am not sure how to do that, David. I'm sorry.
Okay, let it, if you can, if you let him write it. Tell you what, let's hold it to the end, and then we'll come back to it if Prakash can put another comment in. Okay, thank you for those thoughts. So when we look at the politicians, professional politicians, what we see is the populist movement. In whichever country we want to focus on, it appeals to people's fears and their frustrations. And the more that people feel powerless, the more likely they are to go with a populist agenda and therefore to be polarized. It's much, much harder to motivate people around positive agendas and aspirations. You can do it. We're going to put a man on the moon, for example. It's a positive aspiration, but it's much, much harder to do that. It requires a much higher level of leadership with imagination, creativity, and the leaders themselves must be without fear. I'm fascinated to hear all the precautions that President Putin has taken so that he can't catch COVID. So I mean, it's being like sort of locked in his own prison and with so many precautions. It's like Fort Knox. So the newspaper stories say. You know, fear is not a great driver of a successful leader. So it's the politics of nightmares rather than dreams, we have described it as. And you can ask, is that any different in corporate politics? That's not a question that we have an answer to at this stage. I think we can probably find examples, and maybe some of you can offer some of those later. So if you're an executive, you've got political dilemmas like when do you give people bad news? We're going to have to make some layoffs in the spring. Do you tell them now in the autumn, knowing that means that some of your best talent is going to be gone while you still need them? So when do you tell me? When do you do these things? How much information do we give people? I learned the hard way as the chairman of a company not to give everybody in the organization all the financial reports, because they all thought we were going bust when actually we were doing brilliantly and better than any of our competitors. But they didn't understand the data that they got. So we had to spend a whole lot of time educating people in how to read financial reports before we gave the things to them. I think this statement, every executive appointment is a political appointment, has a lot of truth to it. We make the decision on a whole bunch of issues relating to expediency. And no matter what instructions we give the headhunter, that politics will play a significant role in almost every appointment. And we notice that when is the right time to actually bring about a significant change? And again, Adam Grant's book is excellent in looking at how people bide their time. They build up their networks. They get voice. They get more than voice. They get influence. And when they've got influence, then they can act and bring about positive change. And then I'm going to skip this one because I don't think we've got time for this one. I think just the questions around where does the coach go? When you've got, somebody's already indicated their questions, you've got expedient, potentially unethical behavior. What do you do to avoid colluding with it? How do you maintain your own purity, if you like? Or should you be worried about that? What's the right thing to do? We're back into the politics of expediency versus the politics of appropriateness. And should you be supporting your client in a political battle with a rival in the organization without knowing anything about that rival except what you're told by your client? Is it okay to do that? What would you feel about coaching a politician whose views you strongly disagreed with? Who's particularly, if you felt that this person was racist, for example, let's not go into many examples. I'm sure you can create your own. What helps is seeing the difference between being political, so that's acting politically, and being politically aware or astute or adept. And so you need political awareness to achieve the results you want by remaining authentic. It's no good to ignore the politics in an organization. On the other hand, and so we talk about thinking politically, acting with integrity. We have to demonstrate that as coaches, but equally, those are the qualities which we hope and try and aspire to develop in our clients. And some of the things that come into political awareness. What can you actually do with the resources and in the climate that we have within the organization? And what can't you do? What rules do you have to really stick to? Which ones should you work around? What are the prevailing attitudes and myths in this organization? How do we actually make decisions? How many decisions are actually made informally rather than formally and then ratified at the formal meetings? Where are formal decisions made? A fascinating piece of history with a little study that many years ago, I've lost track of where it was, but it looked at where people found out about job opportunities. and it had strong correlations to diversity issues. What it found out was that that a significant proportion of job opportunities were people are made aware of them in the gents' lavatory. The old boy network, you were standing washing your hands, you'd have a chat with a senior person, they would tell you about something to your advantage. And of course, because ladies are not normally invited into that environment, it turned out to be quite a significant factor in the glass ceiling. Now, I've never seen that kind of study replicated, but whether it's true or not, it's the illustrative of the kind of subtle things that go on, the politicized environments. What carries greatest credibility in making you being listened to? Who do people listen to most and not listen to? Again, we're back into diversity issues. Which networks have the biggest influence in an organization? The behaviors that people react positively and negatively, or the system reacts positively and negatively towards. And very often, people who rock the boat, that's regarded as negatively. If that's the case, then you have a real problem in that organization. How do you deal with mistakes? Are mistakes seen as a great learning opportunity or something to be castigated for? What are the issues that top management never likes to talk about? And how do you gain access to decision makers and budget holders within the organization? These are all areas of where if you understand these and are able to work with them, this is about being politically adept inside the organization. And this, I think I actually find this quite a helpful checklist. If we're helping somebody think about building their career in an organization, working through this checklist and getting them to actually understand, how do I work in each of these contexts? So they understand the difference between, in terms of reputation building, between boasting about what you do and actually having other people actually boasting about what you do on your behalf. So many things that we can do to actually help people in an authentic way, and by them being authentic too. So I like these 4 questions too, for the leader, to help them be authentic. Get them succinctly to describe their personal values. Or this is for you actually, as a coach, but how can you describe your personal values and how they contribute to your identity as a coach? When you live up to those values and your aspired identity, what's happening around you? When do you least live up to them? And how do you calibrate how authentic I'm being? So each of these questions you can ask yourself, you can ask the leader that you're working with or the client that you're working with. So they're for both of you. I think, but it's important to ask them about ourselves before we ask them about clients, because we need that self-awareness to be authentic ourselves. And after all, if the client says, well, how would you answer that question? It's a good idea to have thought that one through first. So if you want to develop authenticity, you need to know yourself. What are your own values, your identity? What's your evolving life story? And again, these are all for you as coaches and for your clients. How can you be yourself? What do you do on a daily basis to be as congruent as possible with those elements of yourself? Basically, very often it's, how did I live up to my ideal self today? It's interesting that people have an ethical balance or a moral balance in general. And the way that it works is this. You come out from home in the morning, and you're in a hurry to get to your car, and you trip over the neighbour's cat and drop all your papers. And you're so annoyed that you kick the neighbour's cat. I'm sure none of you would do this, by the way. But you feel so guilty about this that all the way to work now, you've upset your moral equilibrium. I am not the good person I thought I was. So you stick to all the traffic lights, and when you get to the office, you see somebody begging outside, and you're quite generous towards giving them some money as you go into the office. On the other hand, if you've had a great day in the office and you feel a lot of pressure, you might come out of the office, and because you feel above your normal equilibrium, I'm really lived up to the wonderful person, the ideal person that I am. That gives you perfect carte blanche to drive through every red light, exceed the speed limit, and woe betide the poor neighbour's cat if it gets in your way. And this moral equilibrium, with this balance that we have, we're constantly playing with it and being aware of our moral balance and actually saying, am I kidding myself here? What is actually happening inside me here? Knowing yourself. And self-honesty and self-management, recognize when you don't live up to your ideal self. Think about what causes you to do that, to live up to your ideal self or not. Listen to other people when they talk, and their perspectives on you and the way that you behave. And be forgiving of yourself. Because none of us is perfect. And having compassion for ourselves is one of the most important ways of actually developing our authenticity. So if we want to help people manage politics, here are some of the questions we might ask as well. So the key players and their motivations, both their overt motivations and their covert motivations. What will make those key players consider you or your team as part of, as important to their strategy, so they want to cultivate you? What resources and skills do you have that they'll find useful? What can you do to make you aware as a politically strategic resource? What are the core values that you want to uphold, regardless of the pressures from other people? The no-go areas, I will not compromise on these areas. How can you establish those boundaries without creating enemies? And what resources do you have, and what can you do to get advance warning when there's going to be some politically motivated change in the organization? These are all, I think, some of the most powerful questions we can ask to help somebody. How do you actually get to work with politics so that you're, again, politically astute and rather than political? And so, even more, what can you do? Have you thinking about in advance the resources you've got to block damaging and politically motivated change? Having your armies all drawn up or your reserves already in place. When should you have them in place? What have you got in your favor bank towards other people? What about the intent of your boss and your boss's boss and key colleagues? What do you actually know about their intent? What about all those undercurrents in the organization, those hidden conversations, those things which have not come into the open yet, where the mutterings of dissent or discontent, the principles you won't let go of, and your champions and supporters, how are you keeping them motivated to support you? All of these things are not about being political. They're about creating the resources that enable you to remain authentic in a politicized environment. And that is really all I had to say. I've left exactly the right amount of time, a quarter of an hour, for questions, comments, discussion, and even arguments with people who wanted to argue with what I've said. So that would be great, even greater. So over to the rest of you, and I'm going to stop screen sharing now.
That sounded like a challenge there, David.
I hope nobody's going to be overly political with me.
They're holding back at the moment. At the moment.
Well, let's start with some of those things that were left over from before.
Okay, there's been a lot of comments, so bear with me while I find where we were. Okay, so at the very beginning, we had comments like that were in ethical, unethical situations. So paying money to get more business. A coaching client is laid off as part of COVID-19 business changes. I think you mentioned that as well. If not prominent, the underlying focus is performance, not necessarily culture, values, ethics, sustainability.
Yeah.
my client felt that he'd been shortchanged by his employer in terms of not giving him the position he was recruited for, and felt that he was being nominated for coaching to keep him from revolting.
And that's interesting because it's the client's perception. And the question here that comes up time and time again, what is the conversation that needs to happen between that client and his boss? And that's where we said, is there an ethical dilemma here? But it's at the moment, the dilemma is created by the client's internalizing of all of this and creating a narrative which may or may not be true. And so as a coach, if we collude with that narrative, and assuming it's correct, that could be held to be unethical. It could be.
Okay. Comment: it sounds like you must be very self-aware in order to be aware of good and bad ethics.
Yes, I think it's an essential part of it. You need to be wise, basically.
And bending hiring policies in favor of a decision maker of a public sector client giving business.
And there's no simple answer to these. I think basically, if you know and have evidence that something that is being done is unethical and that you are being asked to collude with that, then that is a time as a coach to say, I cannot do that.
And we have a question here which says, my assignment company wants the coachee to be retained and improve on high impact contribution. The role is limited in long term and the coachee would be able to do better to seek some other company job. What should the coach do?
Again, I think the conversation, it comes down to what is the conversation that client needs to have with the boss and HR and others. So many of the dilemmas we see are simply for the courage failure of the client to have the appropriate conversation, or it could be the courage failure by their boss or other people. But having the right conversation tends to resolve many of the dilemmas.
And David, I think that's it. We have a few comments about the changing frame of reference for ethics that you mentioned and how that's been really insightful. I must admit, I wrote that down as well for something to talk about with my groups, because it is a very interesting point. And lots of thank yous. Thanks a ton.
Great. I see that somebody's referred us to an article.
Yes.
I don't know if we can get hold of that. So three cognitive biases of racism at work, the World Economic Forum. So that looks quite interesting.
And I think, oh, here we go. Thank you. Thank you. Thought-provoking. Come on, send in those questions. You can, anything. David even invited you to challenge him.
Well, we do. I do encourage people to take part in our research. That would be great to do that and experience. And I always issue the invitation if people want to. I always accept invitations from coaches to on LinkedIn, so to connect there. So please do, if you would like to do that, please do. But if there are no more questions, then I can go get another cup of tea. And I'm always available at the end of an email. So I think on the slides I've got my email address. So please do if you've got more thoughts, queries around this whole area. The link to the survey is, we're going to be putting the survey out in the next week or two. We're just doing the final completion of it on SurveyMonkey. And there will be a survey to supervisors, a survey coaches, and a survey to leaders.
Thank you, David. We have a question. I think you've seen it. You had a
Simon,
slide on political awareness in corporations. Would these be much different for local authorities or working with politicians?
I think they could probably be pretty similar. Yeah, you might want to adapt them slightly. And yes, we will share the slide deck. You're welcome to do that. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I reckon everyone will agree with me with saying that was very thought-provoking, very insightful. And I imagine if anyone's taken 5 pages of notes like I have, they've learned a lot as well. So thank you so much, David. We really appreciate this. And for everyone watching, please go to awakeawarearise.com to find out about other sessions that will be coming up this week and next week. And also there should be the webpage popping up asking you for your feedback on this session. So thank you for joining us. Take care and stay safe, everybody.
Stay safe, stay well. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Bye.